Welcome everybody to another video on Python for Linguists. Today we'll be talking about looping, how to go over elements in a sequence one at a time and do something with these. As always with these videos, I'd like you to sort of have your hands free, have a live shell open, be ready to sort of code along, do some exercises and also follow along with the code examples. So a little bit of recap on what we've talked about so far is we've encountered the object types string and list, and both of these are ordered sequences, which enables us to do specific things with them, like getting individual elements by their index positions or ranges of their elements by slicing methods. And that's nice if we already know quite a bit about our object and we decide we want to get at something specific. But very often we'll read a text into Python. We'll end up having it probably as a word list. And then we'll want Python to read it word by word, one word at a time. So we need a way to access every individual item one at a time and do something with that item. And precisely to do that, we have the option of writing a for loop. It's a very simple sort of command in Python, but it's going to be very pervasive. We'll see it a lot in all of the code we'll write. So what does it look like? It's really, in its minimal form, 2 lines of code. The first one is an initial prompt that initiates the for loop. So for character in my string, colon. Very important. That can't ever be forgotten or you'll get an error message. And then in the next line, we have an indentation. The sort of default for Python is for every level of indentation to use 4 spaces. So for character in my string, colon. Next line, we indent by 4 spaces and then do print character. Those are the 2 parts of our for loop, right? An initial sort of command that initiates the for loop, and then an indented block of code, here it's just 1 line, that executes a certain command in relation to the individual elements in my string. So if you have something called myString, do that right now. If not, define a string character called myString and kind of try to reproduce this for loop in the live shell. And maybe you can also look at indentation. What happens if you do not indent? What does Python tell you in response to that? Let's look a bit closer at what's going on in this in the relationship between the structures in this for loop. So if you tried writing something like that, for x in my string, print character, that's going to throw an error message. Python's going to tell you the name character is not defined. So what's going on here? We have for x in my string, and then some command that applies to something, right? And the something this applies to is this up here. It's called the loop variable. We're free to basically choose a name for this, right? We can call it for x in my string print x. We can write for character in my string print character. It kind of doesn't really matter. It's really just a placeholder for Python to say whatever element is currently the next, the one I'm looking at in my sequence, that's the name by which I'll call it. So for x in my string print x, that's going to work just fine. For Engelbert in my string print Engelbert, that's also going to work. And in terms of pure coding logic, it's exactly the same, but it's very good practice to give your loop variables meaningful names, right? So if you want something like you want to iterate over the words in a text, you want to write something like for word in my text, do something with that word, right? Or for character or char, if you don't, char, if you don't want to spell it all out, in my string, do something with char. This is, purely just to make the code legible and for you to be able to go back to the code 2 weeks later and still remember what you're doing and what you were thinking. And sometimes also it helps you spot bugs in your code when you have something like for word in my text, and then you do print and you get individual characters, then that gives you an indication that my text is probably not what you think it is, and that you maybe need to reconsider the structure of the code. All right, that's a lot of sort of technicalities with for loops. I think it's a very good idea to just get some practice. So let's do exactly that. Here's a little exercise. Write a for loop that prints every word in your favorite poem or song, or really any other text. I really don't care what kind of a text it is. One word per line. So to do this, find a digital version of the poem, song, or whatever text it is, and feed it into Python as a big string. Turn this big string into a list of words, and don't worry about sort of trailing punctuation devices and stuff. Let's not worry about these for the time being. And then write a for loop over that list of words that prints one word per line. So pause the video here and go through these steps. And I'll continue once you resume, which is now. Last thing I want to say about for loops by way of initial introduction is we're by no means limited to having just one command under the for loop. So it's possible and very often likely that we're going to have a bunch of different commands that will be executed per item that we encounter. So this is something that you could imagine being slightly interesting. We first define a variable, an integer variable called word count that we set to 0. And then we do for x in my word list, provided we have a list of words here. And then we do a bunch of things. Word count is word count plus 1. That just means basically whenever we've moved one element ahead, we also update our word count. Maybe I'll linger on this a little bit. This notion that something can be to the left of an equal sign, and then that something plus 1 is to the right of an equal sign looks wrong mathematically, but remember the x is just a way of defining what's in the variable. And basically what you're saying here is the variable word count is defined as the content of the current variable word count plus 1. And that just overwrites that current variable with the new value. So that's something you'll see a lot in coding. And then we'll also get the length of the current word. And for that, we need to actually refer to the specific word, right? So for x in my word list, here we don't need the specific x. We just keep updating the counter. Here we say the present length is len x. And then we just print a thing. And we have the computer tell us word number such and such. So word number 1 in our text has 3 or whatever characters. And that's printed off one word at a time, one line per word. I'm actually going to try to see if I can remember what I wrote here and try to reproduce this in the shell. Go into Python. Whoops. Excuse me. That's where I want to be. Yeah. So first we need my text. Just keep it simple. And see how I'm really just using a string, including a typo, I guess. And I split that string. That's just a lot easier than writing a list. The result is, in fact, a list. And then I do word count is 0. Then I can do for x in, well, let's do good practice for word in my text. Word count is defined as word count plus 1. Length is len word. And then we just print something. Print word Okay, there's a couple of things we'll need to talk about here. Has but we'll talk about it. Okay. Word 1 has 1 letter, I. Word 2 has 2 letters, am. Word 3 has 1 letter, a. Word 4 has 8 letters, sentence. That looks good. I like what I'm seeing here. Let's talk about this print statement in the last line, and I'm going to go back to the slightly nicer looking way this shows up on the slides here. What's going on with this print statement? It looks very complicated, but it's really everything that's in there ends up being just one long string, right? We have a string that says word number, except it's just a string. Then we add to that string, we want to insert the word count, but that's an integer, right? We define it as an integer variable. So we can convert that to a string. So that's a nice thing Python allows us to do. If we have a 0 or whatever number as an integer, we just do string that, and it gives a string representation of that number. And then more string, and then another string representation of the length plus characters. So that's really, really helpful that we can convert integers into strings anytime we need to. Final pro tip, what we're doing here, word count is word count plus 1. That's something very, very frequently used. It's just something you need to do a lot in coding, sort of have a counter or something that you update as you progress through data. And since it's so common, there's a slightly shorter way of writing it. So instead of writing word count is defined as word count plus 1, you can simply do word count, it's down here, word count plus equals 1. So that just means it is itself plus 1. It's just a convention, something you can get used to. Just makes it a bit easier than spelling all of this out. And that brings us to the end of the looping session. And here's a slightly odd snake picture. Here are my image credits for the images I used for these slides. If you want to look at the slides, you can scan the QR code or visit the website indicated here. Thanks for tuning in, and see you for the next video.